There's a recurring pattern that has brought down every great empire in history. Not conquest, not invasion, not rebellion. It's economic collapse, specifically, the fall of a currency. And remarkably, it always happens the same way. Rome, the empire that ruled much of the known world for 5 centuries, crumbled when its currency lost value. Spain, despite controlling more gold and silver than any other nation in history, went bankrupt again and again until its empire disappeared. Britain, which dominated world trade for 200 years, lost its empire within a single decade after its currency failed. Across recorded history, 4 great empires have followed this exact sequence: military overreach, reckless spending, currency debasement, inflation, collapse of confidence, and finally, ruin. And in every case, those in charge believed they were different, that their empire was unique, immune to the old rules. They were wrong every single time. Now, in 2025, the United States appears to be walking the same road, step by step, warning by warning. The only uncertainty is whether we're at the beginning, the midpoint, or the final stage. This is the story of how empires destroy themselves from within, through the decay of their own currency. How it happened to Rome, Spain, and Britain, and why every signal suggests it's happening again. Rome was the empire that shaped Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for more than 500 years. At its height, it ruled 60 million people across 3 continents. Its army was unmatched, its infrastructure, the envy of the ancient world, and its coin, the denarius, was trusted everywhere from Britain to Egypt. Introduced in 211 BC, the denarius contained about 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, it kept its value because Rome's government preserved its purity. When someone received a denarius, they knew exactly what it represented: genuine silver, real worth. That trust fueled Rome's expansion, paid its legions, and financed its vast network of roads and cities. But empire is expensive. Each generation stretched Rome's borders further, requiring more soldiers, more fortresses, more administrators, and, eventually, more money than it truly had. And like every empire that spends beyond its means, Rome turned to the same dangerous solution: debasement of its currency. Emperor Nero, 5468 AD, was the first to alter the coin. To fund his grand projects and costly military ventures, he reduced the silver content from 100% to 90%. That 10% difference meant pure profit for the emperor. He could now mint 11 coins from the same silver that once made 10. It was clever in theory, but deadly in practice, the earliest form of inflation. At first, the change seemed harmless, but successive emperors went further. By the reign of Caracalla in 211 AD, the denarius contained only 50% silver. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, it had fallen to just 5%. A coin that once held pure silver now made mostly of worthless metal. Imagine being a Roman soldier in 265 AD, paid with coins worth only a fraction of what they once were. The government insisted nothing had changed. The coins still bore the emperor's face and the same name, but their purchasing power had collapsed. Prices exploded. What cost 1 denarius in 200 AD now costs 50 by 300 AD. Farmers refused to sell food for coins and demanded barter instead. Soldiers wanted payment in gold or goods. Tax collectors couldn't collect because no one trusted the currency. The entire economy seized up, not from invasion or disease, but from a self-inflicted wound. Rome had destroyed its own currency to fund what it couldn't afford, and when the currency died, the empire followed. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially fell, not because its enemies were stronger, but because it could no longer pay its armies or sustain its infrastructure. The pattern was set. Military expansion, overspending, currency debasement, inflation, collapse. Rome proved the rule. Every empire since has repeated it. Leap forward 12 centuries to the 1500s. Spain was entering its golden age. Columbus had opened the New World. Cortez and Pizarro had conquered the Aztecs and Incas. Spain now ruled the richest territories on earth. In 1545, explorers uncovered Cerro Rico Mountain in what is now Bolivia, the largest silver deposit ever found. For the next 100 years, That mountain produced nearly half of the world's silver. Galleons packed with treasure crossed the Atlantic, filling Spain's treasury with unimaginable wealth. Silver coins minted from these mines became the first global currency, the Spanish dollar, used and trusted across Europe and Asia. Spain appeared unstoppable, but as Rome showed, abundance can be fatal. More money doesn't make a nation richer when everyone suddenly has more money. When Spain flooded Europe with silver, prices soared. What once cost 1 coin in 1500 cost 10 by 1600. It wasn't that the silver was impure. There was simply too much of it. That's inflation. And Spain made the same critical mistake. It consumed wealth instead of creating it. Rather than building industries or innovation, Spain extracted silver and spent it on wars, palaces, and foreign luxury goods. The silver that flowed in from the Americas quickly flowed back out to pay France, England, and the Netherlands for goods Spain no longer produced itself. By the late 1500s, Spain was drowning in debt. King Philip II inherited more than 36 million ducats of obligations. Instead of cutting spending, he borrowed even more, funding wars against the Ottoman Empire, Protestant rebels, and England. When the debts became unpayable, he did something no major ruler had ever done before. He declared bankruptcy in 1557, the first sovereign default in modern history. And it didn't stop there. Spain defaulted again in 1560, 1575, and 1596, 4 times in 40 years. Despite controlling half of the world's silver, the empire couldn't pay its bills. Each default destroyed trust. Lenders stopped lending. Interest rates skyrocketed. Desperate, the government debased its currency, minting coins with less silver and issuing copper coins pretending to hold equal value. No one believed it. By the 1600s, Spain was in terminal decline. It could no longer finance its armies. Colonies began slipping away. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 marked the beginning of the end. By 1700, the once mighty empire was effectively finished, undone by overspending, inflation, and debt. Spain proved the pattern again: a flood of wealth, reckless borrowing, inflated currency, defaults, loss of confidence, collapse. Even endless resources couldn't save an empire from its own mismanagement. Next came Britain, the empire that stretched further, lasted longer, and commanded more wealth than Rome or Spain combined. At its height in 1922, Britain governed nearly 458 million people, 1/4 of the world's population and land. The sun never set on the British Empire, not as a poetic phrase, but as a literal truth. Somewhere across the globe, it was always daylight under British rule. At the heart of that power stood the British pound sterling, the foundation of global trade for over 2 centuries. More than 60% of world transactions were conducted in pounds. It was backed by gold, stable and trusted. 1 pound could always be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. That stability created the backbone of the empire's power, confidence, and credibility. But empires are built on credit, and every credit must one day be repaid. Britain financed its global reach through massive borrowing, selling government bonds, funding wars, colonies, and infrastructure on debt. As long as the pound held firm, the system worked. Then came World War I, the spark that shattered the illusion. In 1914, Britain's national debt stood at around $650 million. By 1919, just 5 years later, it had skyrocketed to over $7 billion, more than 10 times higher. The war had forced Britain to borrow from anyone willing, citizens, colonies, and, most importantly, the United States. When war broke out, Britain was forced to suspend the gold standard. The government couldn't keep gold backing for every pound while also printing money to pay for war. The pound became a fiat currency, backed only by the government's promise. After the war, Britain tried to restore faith. In 1925, Chancellor Winston Churchill reintroduced the gold standard, but disastrously, he fixed it at the old pre-war exchange rate. The pound was now overvalued. British exports became too expensive, unemployment soared, and interest rates rose to defend the currency, crushing growth. By 1931, Britain was forced off gold permanently. the pound was devalued, and the world's faith began to erode. The real collapse, however, came after World War II. Britain entered the conflict already deeply in debt and ended it nearly bankrupt. By 1945, the national debt reached 270% of GDP. The war had destroyed cities, industries, and lives. Britain had won militarily, but lost financially. Even worse, it now owed vast sums to the United States. During the war, global leaders gathered at the Bretton Woods Conference, 1944, to rebuild the world's financial system. There, Britain officially lost its place as the world's financial anchor. The U.S. dollar replaced the pound as the global reserve currency. Britain tried to maintain its influence, but the writing was on the wall. They no longer had the gold, the economy, or the confidence to sustain their currency. In 1947, the government made the pound convertible again, meaning foreign nations could exchange it freely. Within 6 weeks, a run on the currency forced Britain to reverse the decision. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. In 1967, it was devalued again. Each time, savings evaporated and trust vanished. Meanwhile, the empire unraveled. India gained independence in 1947. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, and Britain's military response was a humiliating failure. Colony after colony broke away, not because of conquest, but because Britain simply couldn't afford to maintain control. By the 1,970 Britain teetered on economic disaster. Inflation surged above 25%. The once proud empire went to the IMF for a bailout, an act unthinkable just decades earlier. The pound, once the world's gold-backed reserve, had become a symbol of decline. Within 30 years, the empire that ruled a quarter of the earth was gone, not through invasion, but through financial exhaustion. The pattern once more: war debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status, devaluation, inflation, imperial collapse. Britain's fall showed that even the most dominant empire can unravel within a single generation when its currency fails. Now we arrive at the present: the United States, the modern empire, the current issuer of the world's reserve currency. And every warning sign that destroyed Rome, Spain, and Britain is now blinking red for America. The U.S. dollar has held the global reserve title since 1944 thanks to the Bretton Woods system. After World War II, the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, while other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar. It was literally as good as gold. But like the empires before it, America began to spend more than it earned. Wars in Vietnam, massive welfare programs under the Great Society, hundreds of military bases around the globe, all added up. By the late 1960s, other nations noticed something alarming. The United States was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France's President Charles de Gaulle began exchanging dollars for gold, and other countries followed. Gold reserves at Fort Knox started to drain. The bluff was being called. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that changed financial history forever. He closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility into gold. From that day, the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed only by trust and the U.S. government's promise. At first, it seemed to work. The petrodollar system, established in the 1970s, ensured global demand for U.S. dollars, since oil was priced exclusively in dollars. But beneath that stability, the same fatal pattern was forming again. America's debt began to explode. In 1980, U.S. national debt stood at $900 billion. By 2000, it was $5.6 trillion. By 2020, it had reached $27 trillion. And in 2025, it now surpasses $36 trillion, a 40-fold increase in 45 years, with no sign of slowing down. But debt alone isn't the entire story. Like Rome debasing the denarius and Spain flooding the world with silver, the United States began printing money on a scale never seen before. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars digitally through policies called quantitative easing, supposedly to stabilize the economy. During the COVID crisis, the Fed printed over $4 trillion in just 2 years, more than in the previous century combined. And like the rulers of every past empire, modern economists assured the public it wouldn't cause inflation. They said, "This time is different." But history disagrees. By 2022, official inflation hit 9%, though real costs for housing, food, and healthcare were much higher. The dollar's value is eroding, slowly at first, but patterns like this always accelerate. At the same time, the U.S. is losing its most crucial advantage, reserve currency dominance. In 2000, around 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, it's around 58% and falling. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are building alternatives, trading in local currencies, and developing new systems that bypass the dollar. China and Russia are buying gold at record levels, and central banks everywhere are quietly diversifying away from dollars. The world is preparing, just as it once did before the British pound fell, for the dollar's decline. And once again, the pattern is unmistakable. The most alarming part is that the United States now mirrors Rome's fatal flaw, military overextension. The U.S. maintains nearly 800 military bases in over 70 countries, with an annual defense budget exceeding $800 billion. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan alone cost more than $8 trillion. Like Rome paying its legions with debased silver, America funds its global presence with debt and printed money. The pattern is no longer a theory. It's history repeating itself in real time. So, let's lay out the pattern, because once you see it, it's impossible to ignore. Every fallen empire has moved through the same 7 stages. This is the Golden Age. The empire stands at its peak, militarily powerful, economically unmatched, and backed by a trusted currency. Rome had the silver denarius. Spain had the silver dollar. Britain had the gold-backed pound. America has the dollar. In every case, the currency was once tied to something real, gold, silver, or a long-established trust. The empire seems invincible. Then comes expansion beyond sustainability. The empire stretches too far. More land, more military commitments, more promises to citizens. Rome ruled 3 continents. Spain tried to command every ocean. Britain colonized a quarter of the planet. America now operates bases across every continent, policing the world. Each expansion multiplies cost until spending becomes impossible to contain. To maintain the illusion of prosperity, the empire begins borrowing. At first, it seems manageable. Loans, bonds, and deficits justified by power. But soon, the deficits become permanent. Rome needed to pay soldiers. Spain needed to fund endless wars. Britain needed to rebuild after the global conflict. America now runs trillion-dollar deficits every single year, even during peacetime and growth. When borrowing and taxation can't keep up, the empire turns to the printing press. Rome diluted its silver, Spain flooded Europe with silver, Britain abandoned the gold standard and devalued its pound. America cut its gold link in 1971 and has printed ever since. Each time, leaders promise it's temporary, necessary, controlled. Each time, the currency weakens, and faith begins to erode. As the supply of money grows faster than the supply of real goods, prices surge. Rome saw a 50-fold increase in prices. Spain's inflation swept across Europe. Britain's 1,970 seconds. Inflation hit 25%. And the United States has entered the same stage. Government reports may call it transitory, but the pattern says otherwise. Inflation is always the warning siren before confidence breaks. Once trust dies, collapse accelerates. Citizens in foreign nations stop believing in the currency's value. Roman soldiers demanded gold instead of denarii. Spain's creditors refused to lend after repeated defaults. Britain's empire fell when the world abandoned the pound. Now, nations are slowly turning away from the dollar. The shift is gradual, but it's happening. Confidence is the foundation of every empire's economy, and once that foundation cracks, nothing can hold the system up. At last comes the fall. The economic system breaks, the currency loses dominance, or becomes worthless. The empire can no longer fund its military, maintain trade, or govern effectively. Rome fell when it could no longer pay its armies. Spain sank into irrelevance. Britain lost its empire within a generation. And the United States, that's the stage we're rapidly approaching. This isn't speculation, it's a cycle, mathematically certain. Different empires, different currencies, different centuries, but always the same sequence. Because economic laws are as absolute as gravity, you cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print wealth out of thin air, and you cannot debase your currency without destroying your foundation. By every measure, the U.S. stands in stage 5, deep in inflation and sliding towards stage 6, loss of confidence. History gives us only 3 outcomes from this stage. First, controlled decline. Like Britain after 1945, the empire loses global dominance. Its currency weakens, its power fades, but it survives. A slow, painful, humiliating transition from first-class empire to second-tier nation. Second, chaotic collapse. Like Rome in the 5th century, the currency becomes worthless, the state loses control, the system fractures into chaos. This is the worst-case outcome: economic breakdown, social turmoil, and the fall of civilization structure. Third, reset and restructure. The world builds a new financial system. Perhaps a gold-backed currency returns, perhaps a new global reserve currency emerges, maybe the Chinese yuan, a mix of digital assets, or a multinational basket. Painful, yes, but the system survives through reinvention. The United States now stands at this crossroads. Its debt is unpayable. Its spending is unsustainable. The only possible outcomes are default, inflation, or restructuring. A default would instantly destroy the dollar's credibility. Inflation is already eroding it. And restructuring, the only real solution, demands political courage that, so far, doesn't exist. Here's what makes this different from any collapse before. Rome, Spain, and Britain were regional empires. Their downfalls shook their territories, but the world moved on. The U.S. dollar, however, is the global reserve currency. When it falls, the shock will ripple across the entire world, through every central bank, every trade agreement, every market. The world economy is interconnected, amplifying both crisis and chaos. And yet, the pattern remains mercilessly consistent. It's not a prediction, it's precedent. 4 empires, 4 collapses. The same mathematics every time. You can delay it, you can deny it, but you cannot escape it. Rome diluted its coins until they were worthless. Spain drowned itself in silver. Britain borrowed until it lost its empire. Now, America prints trillions, running record deficits, convinced it's immune. But history doesn't care about belief. The pattern doesn't care about military might, technological progress, or ideology. It only follows one law: economic truth. You cannot create prosperity by printing money. You cannot borrow endlessly without consequence. And no empire, no matter how exceptional, can outrun this cycle. 4 empires, 4 collapses, 4 identical sequences. So the only question that remains is when, not if. How long until stage 6 begins? How long until the world loses faith in the dollar? How long until the American empire joins Rome, Spain, and Britain in the pages of history? The pattern says soon. The debt says soon. The endless money printing says soon. And history, which has witnessed this same sequence destroy every great empire before, says the ending is inevitable. The only unknown is how fast it happens and how painful the fall will be. If this perspective opened your eyes, subscribe, because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand how and why it happened. History already has the answers. And one lesson never changes: the pattern never lies.